Hello, beautiful people. My name is James, and I'm the proud owner of 365 Fitness in Bishops Waltham. We are the #1 small group personal training studio that helps local people to 50, 60 and older gain strength, move more freely, increase their confidence and energy levels to ultimately live life to the fullest. Welcome to the 365 Fitness podcast, where we'll be talking all things health and fitness with our team of coaches, our members and local professionals. If you find any of this useful, then please use that follow button and share this podcast far and wide, because sometimes a little nudge is all you need to change your life. Hello, welcome back to another solo episode where we are going through our nutrition workshops here at 365 Fitness. So in the first episode, we went through weeks 0 and week 1, and then I'm going to do my best to cover weeks 2 and 3 with you now. Hopefully, if I don't go in and ramble on too much, we can get 2 weeks in per pod. So just to recap, week 0, we set the foundations of what to expect over the 6 weeks. We were getting people to book their strength sessions in ahead of time, so 2 to 3 sessions per week. We were doing a food diary, and we were tracking our step counts to see how active we were outside of our 1 hour at the gym. And then we were focusing heavily on our protein intake. Just a little reminder, it was 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So that takes us then into the next couple of weeks. We've set the foundations, everybody is up and running. And then we go in to talk all about habits and behaviors. Now, I'm a huge believer that a lot of the time, nutrition doesn't come down to the foods that we eat and what we're consuming. The vast majority of it is dependent on the habits that we have and the behaviors that we have. And we're going to deep dive into that somewhat for the next few minutes. So I will add the podcast. There's a Stephen Bartlett podcast that he did maybe 2 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, where it's all around like New Year's resolutions and making and breaking bad habits. And there's a great story around a test that was done with some rats and a maze. Now I'm going to do my best to recite this story. I always almost butcher it, so bear with as I explain. So what they did was they took a group of rats and they popped them into a maze. They popped them into a situation that they'd never been into before, and they just observed how long it took them to find their way out of the maze. And obviously over time and the repetition of it, they started to learn a bit of a pattern of once they got dropped into the maze, they turned left, turned right, went up there, round the corner, and out they went out of the maze. And they started to build that habit of, when I get dropped into this maze, these are the actions I then take to get to my desired outcome. What they then decided to do was they added in a treat. So I believe it was like cheese or chocolate or something into the maze, but on like the other side to where the exit was. And quickly over time, again, the rats discovered where this treat was, where this nice bit of food was. And they started to relearn that pattern of behavior of when they get dropped in the maze, they took the necessary steps, but this time they were adding in that trip over to the food before they left. And again, that became the habit, that became the norm. To then put it to the test to see whether it was actually the food they were after or just the habit of going to that same location, they ended up poisoning the food, and still the rats would go in over to where the food was, consume the poison this time rather than the food, and then obviously leave the maze. And they would continue to do that process even though they knew, or they didn't necessarily know at this point, that there no longer was the reward that was there, it was something different, which goes to show that sometimes it's the habit, it's that learnt behavior which gets us to where we're going, rather than necessarily like the food in this scenario, or might be like the alcoholic drink for some of us that we turn to. It's not necessarily the craving of that particular thing, it's the habit or the learnt behavior that has got us there. So again, almost to wrap that story up, they then removed the food and the poison entirely, yet the rats still would go back to that point, even though there was nothing there before they left. So a good story that Stephen Bartlett then says is around his dad and around smoking, and how there was an environmental trigger for his dad that whenever he got into his car, he would reach down into the little side tray in the car door, and he had some cigarettes. So every time he got in the car, he'd reach down, pick up a cigarette, and he would smoke whilst he was in the car. Stephen explained this sort of habit and behavior theory to him. And what they actually did was he changed the packet of cigarettes just to a packet of sweets. So he changed what was there, obviously for the better, because anything will be better than smoking. And what he ended up doing, he realized it wasn't the cigarettes that he was craving. It was just the habit. It was the action of, I get in the car, I reach down into the tray and I'll take whatever's there. So literally overnight, he's managed to cure his like smoking habit by just changing that habit, that cue that he'd created. Now, hopefully this is starting to spark some sort of reality for some of you and going, oh, maybe it is just habit as to why I go and look in the fridge at certain times of the day, or why I always go and do certain actions at certain occasions. Now, one thing that I will always do is whenever I finish my dinner, I have a real sweet tooth. So regardless if I'm full or not, I will go and open the fridge to see what is in the fridge. Now, if I wasn't being aware of my nutrition, and probably in position that some of you guys that are listening in, the fridge is probably going to have a lot of really nice sugary foods in it. It's going to have chocolate and sweets and ice creams and things like that in the fridge. So my habit of opening the fridge is then going to have a somewhat detrimental effect because I'm going to reach for those nice high sugar foods. Whereas now I've got the awareness that my habit is my dinner finishes, I go to the fridge. If I've actually filled the fridge with healthy, nutritious foods and yogurts and other things, actually me having that habit's not necessarily a bad thing. I could go into the fridge and have a yogurt. That way I'm still having that same behavior, that same habit, but I've just changed the outcome of what might happen over time. Because as with anything, if you do something, a compounding effect time and time again, that small action will ultimately lead to something far greater. And whether that's a positive thing or a negative thing, those small actions day to day will ultimately lead you to something bigger. So have a little think for me at the moment. It's what we do in our group. What is there in our week that potentially could be a trigger to you necessarily having a bad habit, or a habit that we don't necessarily want to reinforce? I'll give you some ideas. We talk about that 4 p.m. snack, that potentially you've picked the kids up from school and you've come home, or you've just finished work. You put the laptop down and naturally, instinctively, you'll go and get yourself a drink. You might go and get yourself something to eat because you're telling yourself you're hungry, but actually the trigger is that environmental trigger of, oh, it's this time of the day and I always get something at this time. One that was discussed quite a lot in our group was that for people with young families, they would be cooking their kids dinner before they ate their own dinner. And naturally, as a result of cooking their kids' dinner, they would be picking at their food whilst cooking it before they then went and ate their own dinner. So you can obviously imagine how that can compound over time, those excess calories every day that you eat your kids' food, as well as then your own meal on top. But you probably wouldn't even realise you were doing it unless we took the time like we are now to recognise those things. An environmental trigger, because our environment does play a huge factor in how we act, how we respond. It could be that when you're at the office at work and you go and put the kettle on for your tea break, inevitably there's always going to be biscuits and sweets sat on the side. And it might just be the fact that you're walking past day to day and that those things are there. You might necessarily want it, but you find yourself reaching for it out of habit anyways. So I guess people are like, well, what can we do? And I touched on it a little bit earlier with myself and what I was doing with the fridge. And ultimately, it does come down to preparation. It does come down to being well organised and thought ahead. But if we can fill those areas where we know that potentially I'm going to go reaching into the fridge or the cupboards, we can remove those sort of high sugar, high fat foods and replace them with things that are slightly more nutritious and better for us. Again, me coming at it from a health perspective, I don't mind if you go and reach into the fridge and grab something healthy. All right, it might be more calories than you'd want to eat in a day, but we've all got to live a little bit, haven't we? Like, you don't want to just be completely miserable and completely neglect yourself of anything that's remotely nice. It might just be that we're a bit more savvy with how and when we're doing it. It might be that you could be the person that breaks the mold at the office, and rather than coming in with chocolate and sweets, you come in with a fruit hamper. And I can almost guarantee that if you swapped out the chocolate and sweets and you left on the exact same place where they are, a bowl that's got bananas, apples, oranges in there, your colleagues, the other people around you, are probably naturally just going to eat what's in front of them rather than being like, hang on a minute, why is there fruit there and not chocolate? It might create some intrigue, but it'd be really interesting if some of you could test that out in your workspaces and see whether it does naturally change people's habits there. Obviously, we've done a bit of a whistle stop on the habits and behaviors, but what we sort of get people to look at in our workshop now, those 3 commitments that we keep talking about, would be to try and recognize a minimum of 2 triggers that they personally have. It could be their environment, it could be a timing thing, it could be an occasion. A lot of people, the trigger could be around stress and emotion. A lot of people are emotional eaters. I think we're all guilty of that. So it's one of those commitments is finding out those triggers and being a bit more aware. We encourage you to keep taking photographs of your food and your sort of nutrition day to day. And then the next thing that we add in is just an extra glass of water into your day. Again, we're not saying you now got to have 8 glasses of water every single day. It's just one more than you normally do. Now, again, if a lot of the time we're not hungry, we're dehydrated. So that would be our 3rd commitment going in to that 2nd week. So looking at your triggers, keeping photographing your food, and adding in that glass of water. Tell you what I'll do is I think that's plenty for you guys to mull over for this episode of the podcast. And in the following episode, so our week 3 of the nutrition course, we will be looking at social occasions and how we can navigate those, because obviously they are a tricky scenario. Again, coming at it from a lens of we need to be able to live and enjoy ourselves and be in the moment with family and friends, whilst also keeping an eye on our overall health. Hope you enjoyed this one. Please leave a comment or give this a thumbs up on Spotify would be fab. And next time we'll be going all over social occasions.